Part of the role of an anthropologist is to recognize symbols of a particular culture and to look for a keystone especially. A keystone is defined as a central stone at the summit of an arch, locking the whole together. And in a symbolic sense, the anthropologist knows that the keystone, which will oftentimes have a symbol on it, carved on it, placed on it, will then, as a result, reveal the central principle or part of a policy, system, etc., on which all else depends. So as archaeologists dig up cultures, will dig up a building with an arch for a doorway and find a keystone. And they might uncover a keystone that has such a carving on it. The anthropologist will then look at that to identify the principles of such a culture or practice that was held within the building. In Mormonism, there are lots of symbols, and outwardly Mormons profess, as it is self-defined in the introduction of the Book of Mormon, that the Book of Mormon is to be the keystone of Mormonism. And so that would be taken under consideration with an anthropological viewpoint. As it would go through the Book of Mormon, such a person would go through the Book of Mormon to identify the behaviors espoused within the Book of Mormon, preached, taught about, to then compare with actual Mormon behavior and practice to see if it truly is the keystone of Mormonism. However, on the Salt Lake Temple, the keystone of the doors of the Salt Lake Temple have a falling star. It's called an inverted pentagram. That same inverted pentagram is on the keystone of the Eagle Gate there on State Street at Temple Square. It was designed by Brigham Young's son, Don Carlos, as the keystone was ordered by Brigham Young on the temple. As the temple was finished after Brigham Young's death. And that keystone comes from, in origin, in a religious sense, from, the origin is a falling star. It goes all the way back to the Egyptians. And the Egyptians go way back in the origin of anthropological, religious, cultural history. But in regards to the modern understanding, we look then to the Bible. The Vulgate text, which was around 400 CE, just before 400 CE, we have a passage in Isaiah which adds the word Lucifer to the text of Isaiah from the Latin Vulgate. Isaiah 14, chapter 12. How art thou fallen from heaven? So there we see the universal meaning of a falling star. And Isaiah in the Latin Vulgate is comparing the falling star to Lucifer, which in Latin means light bearer, son of the morning. And that is metaphoric or descriptive of the star Venus. And when you get to 13, you see how the human characteristics of this Lucifer character is attached to Venus. I will ascend into heaven. I will exalt my throne above the stars of God. I will sit also upon the mount of the congregation in the sides of the north. I will ascend above the heights of the clouds. I will be like the Most High. Yet thou shalt be brought down to hell, to the sides of the pit. This is Venus. Venus, as the morning star, never reaches the southernmost horizon where the sun does every single day, because the sun is so much brighter that it blocks out the view of Venus. Once the sun is risen, Venus disappears. It's gone. It fell. And so an anthropologist will look to Mormonism and say, okay, well, which keystone is being applied? Is it the Book of Mormon that Mormons follow and adhere to as the keystone? Or is it the inverted pentagram on the Salt Lake Temple and at the Eagle Gate, there at headquarters of Temple Square? And so for this, we would need to look to the Book of Mormon text, see the behavior that Mormons are supposed to emulate. We have in the Book of Mormon itself a retelling of the Isaiah passage, even warning Mormons that they're not supposed to be emulating the keystone of the inverted pentagram of Lucifer. 2 Nephi chapter 24 verse 12. How art thou fallen from heaven, O Lucifer, son of the morning? Which, to have Lucifer in it, when it was put in the Vulgate text, is an anachronism. It's an error. As the Book of Mormon is claimed by Mormons to be a real history and record of the indigenous people on America that came to America in this particular section 600 years BC. So what is Lucifer doing in the text? That's something else that would concern an anthropologist in regards to the linguistic research of the Book of Mormon. But for this video, we're focused on the Keystone of Mormonism. And so in 1 Nephi chapter 13, Nephi, in the story, sees a vision. An angel is helping interpret what is being seen by Nephi. And he sees kingdoms of the Gentiles. And in verse 4, and it came to pass that I saw among the nations of the Gentiles the formation of a great church. And the angel said unto me, Behold, the formation of a church which is most abominable above all other churches, which slayeth the saints of God, yea, and tortureth them, and bindeth them down, and yoketh them with a yoke of iron, and bringeth them down into captivity. And it came to pass that I beheld this great and abominable church, and I saw the devil, that he was the founder of it. So the anthropologist is confused at this point, because the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints preaches and teaches the Book of Mormon as the Keystone. And yet, the inverted pentagram of Lucifer is being described anthropologically right here in the Book of Mormon in 1 Nephi chapter 13. And it goes on. And I also saw gold and silver and silks and scarlets and fine twined linen and all manner of precious clothing, and I saw many harlots. And the angel spake unto me, saying, Behold, the gold and the silver and the silks and the scarlets and the fine twined linen and the precious clothing and the harlots are the desires of this great and abominable church. And also for the praise of the world do they destroy the saints of God, and bring them down into captivity. As an anthropologist, recognizing linguistically that the Book of Mormon is not an actual history, but part of the founders' documents, it then becomes necessary to recognize what's called the succession crisis. The succession crisis happened on June 27th, 1844. That was the assassination of Joseph and Hiram Smith in Carthage jail. The Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints does not give nearly as much attention, if at all, to the founder, to his death, but rather to Brigham Young and his arrival in the Salt Lake Valley. The focus is on Brigham and the arrival in the Salt Lake Valley. Excuse me. And it's Brigham Young who utilized the inverted pentagram symbol, who ordered it, whose son utilized it for the Eagle Gate. And so then, as you get into an anthropological comparison of the organization that Brigham Young utilized versus what Joseph Smith utilized, you see that they are completely different. And what you recognize is that Brigham Young embraced the Church of the Devil as described in the Book of Mormon, which Brigham Young still utilized for his followers. As members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints still utilize the Book of Mormon as their keystone. Yet the church fulfills to a T the great and abominable church within the Book of Mormon claim to be their keystone. So now an anthropologist has to go to the Mormons themselves. How do they perceive which of the two keystones are their keystone? Mormons immediately respond, the Book of Mormon is the keystone of Mormonism. And you look at, in our day and time, social media posts. There's a Mormon woman whose channel name is Sunday Jess. She dedicates her channel to talking about and sharing her mission experiences in helping other Mormon women prepare for a mission with the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. One of her thumbnails has inverted pentagrams imposed onto the picture as part of the thumbnail. Yet the video itself talks nothing about the inverted pentagram symbol. She seems oblivious to the symbolic meaning of a falling star and just put it up there naturally, clueless of its meaning. So then we look at church videos talking about the symbolism of the Salt Lake Temple, symbols defined by the Mormon Church, and they skip the inverted pentagram. They do not talk about it. We then find online Mormon apologists who redefine the universally understood meaning of a falling star and the Latin Vulgate attachment to Lucifer, which was anachronismed in the Book of Mormon. And we then must ask ourselves, do these apologists know what they're doing? Or are they part of a plot to cover up and deceive Mormons? Because clearly the prophets are fulfilling to a T the great and abominable church. Yet regular Mormons seem oblivious continue to think the Book of Mormon is the Keystone. But Mormon apologists seem to be fully aware of the universal understood symbol meaning and yet redefine it for Mormons. That for Mormons it has a unique meaning contrary to everyone else in the world. So now we have to go to the behavior of Mormonism. What does the behavior inform the anthropologist as to whether the keystone for them is the Book of Mormon or Lucifer's inverted falling star? Among Mormons, there is a fear of the church. Ex-Mormons fear coming out of the closet of Mormonism and leaving. 13 million Mormons since 2011, 2012, have just up and stopped being Mormon. They haven't gone through the process of confronting their bishop, signing the document to have their names removed. They just gave up on the church, silently disappeared. 13 million. Approximately. This is done by taking the claimed membership number and utilizing the online page, going over the membership numbers for the wards and branches around the world, and understanding the capacities for wards and branches. It's different in the United States than it is elsewhere in the world. The United States allows for greater attendance before a ward or a branch is either split or upgraded. And it also has to do with the number of elders in that decision-making process. And as it turns out, the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints is, by clinging to actual baptismal records, able to deceive in the financial world because they don't have the actual membership. The Mormons have just secretly gone away, stopped attending, disappeared as they move. As those disappearances get piled up in the records department of the church, who employees are assigned to search for them around the world to find them and provide the local ward or branch stake with their identification, when clearly they don't want to be found. What then is the cause of this fear? I have encountered Mormons who, at a church activity, slipped and fell, required hospitalization, and have had lasting health problems ever since. Our economic society demands that we sue to cover the costs of health care. But Mormons will not sue the church. Mormons who sue the church find that they get retaliated against. A sister missionary, or former sister missionary, while at the MTC, claims she was raped by her mission president. She sued, confronted that mission president later on at his own ward. The video went viral. And then she was beaten and poisoned. She claims it was in retaliation. I myself, as a scientist, I realize that if you want to get an understanding of the subject matter, that you have to immerse yourself in it to see what comes out. And as I was born and raised Mormon, I got to see firsthand how the church treats those who stand up for their rights. I caught the church having ordered and paid for my assassination. Having ordered and paid for my indefinite incarceration out of the justice system, to be tortured indefinitely and eventually murdered through that process. 6 years of my life, all because the church helped my first acts and abandoned me. Wanted me to just let it go and move on with my life, away from my kids, as they were helping her financially, helping her to leave me, helping her to abandon the marriage, flee the country with the kids. And the church abandoned me, refused to give me assistance when I needed it. And as a defensive position, I was forced to sue, because that's what we have to do in this society. When I got myself out of that indefinite incarceration and found out that they had ordered and paid for it to have me assassinated along with it, I was forced to sue. because I was still being attacked by the church. As the church has an administration pattern system exactly like the American criminal organization. And as RICO law is supposed to deal with criminal organizations, where the actions and crimes of lesser down the chain of authority can implicate the leader at the top. But I had evidence of the leaders themselves giving the order. And I soon found out that the judges in the federal court are all compromised to the church. The majority of them are Mormon. I was assigned a magistrate judge who had been fired for allowing to proceed a case against the church, and was reassigned as she was on her way out to my case for the sole purpose of having it dismissed. When you tell authorities to not investigate a case, or to tell a judge, just dismiss the case, that is a crime in and of itself. All cases must be heard in a trial and then decided. Not in my case. The church threatened the federal judges to dismiss my lawsuit with prejudice, and the Mormon judge granted it. They delayed it, strung me out with false hope, but in the end caved to the extortion threat of the church through the lawyers. And then I sued again. This time the focus was on the judges being compromised. They're required to recuse themselves when there's a conflict, when there is compromising that is involved. Mormons pay tithing, and it's not a donation, and it's not a membership fee. It's a protection racket, by definition, according to the practice that the church uses, for which I can go over with you, as its real intention was to help the poor, not for publications of the Book of Mormon and building temples with fine, elaborate materials and churches throughout the world. And so, as I see this pattern over and over again of regular Mormons being clueless to the symbol of Lucifer, and even ex-Mormons who do videos about the church being critical, constantly repeating the video that the church is a cult. as they are apparently oblivious about occults. The Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, by turning Joseph Smith's history into real history, as they do the Book of Mormon as real history, are defining the Church for Mormons as occult. O-C-C-U-L-T. Satanism is also O-C-C-U-L-T, not a cult. And having done videos on YouTube myself to observe reactions from Mormon and ex-Mormon audiences and non-Mormon, there is a fear and an avoidance of such videos compared to other videos. Because they don't seem to understand the universally understood meaning. And so it's a sense of denial or rejection that such is the case. So Mormons, likewise, as ex-Mormons, know about the Great and Abominable Church, but are unwilling to actually come right out and say, yeah, it is the Great and Abominable Church as defined in the Book of Mormon. Now, is this a trauma result? That Mormons are victimized? That they are in bondage to the church? Yeah. Is it Stockholm Syndrome for the remaining 3 million Mormons? Could be. The remaining 3 million Mormons do speak adoringly of the prophets. They outwardly claim they follow the living prophet. So then, what is the behavior of the 3 million? They're well known and love to hear reports and studies saying that Utah is the friendliest state. But 13 million ex-Mormons speak contrary, as those who do videos for social media share a common theme in leaving ex-Mormons, or leaving as ex-Mormons. That Mormons, even family member Mormons, are satanic. They use the tactics by the church leaders of extortion threats, fear tactics, intimidation, with threats of extortion, violence, and orders for assassination. Death threats by Mormons for merely telling the facts about what happened to the ex-Mormons. Mormons downplay ex-Mormon voices, claiming that they weren't spiritual enough that they lost their testimony. Ex-Mormons say they went through a faith crisis instead of losing a testimony, which you can't lose a testimony. It's the end result of one's faith. So faith, yes, you can lose your faith and have doubt, but you can't lose a testimony. What these ex-Mormons experienced is real. They no longer go to church. They have been treated by Mormons in response to their leaving the church. Mormon apologists use their social media platforms to use ad hominem attacks on ex-Mormons, to belittle them, as it seems to therefore justify that the church is true. It's not equivalent. It actually does the opposite, or the contrary. It shows that the church is actually satanic. You have groups like DesNat that have risen up wanting to take away agency of less active Mormons, those who have fallen away as ex-Mormons. To obey the living prophet. When they claim that there's nothing wrong in that, they get militant and violent, with the end goal justifying the means. Yet again, Mormon scripture says that Satan employs taking away agency, not the true God. And so are the remaining 3 million Mormons, oblivious or knowingly and therefore outwardly lying and deceiving? And it could be a bit of both. I grew up in a Mormon household. Both my parents served LDS missions. They employed taking away agency upon us as kids. I, however, was the rebellious one in the family. Refused to have my agency taken. I wanted to do what I wanted to do, and they weren't going to tell me any other way. And I ended up winning for the most part, except for in the end I do lose because I'm stuck in their household. And so when I turned 18 and could go off to college, I took it. They were going to pay for it, so great. Just to get away. Because Lucifer's implementation of government does not appeal to me. I don't like it. And so I want it out. Utah has government leaders who implement Lucifer's taking away of agency. In contrary and almost as in defiance of the United States and the Constitution that was implemented to give agency. women and blacks still needed amendments so that they too could be considered human and equal. But there's still a push among white supremacists in government to suppress that, as throughout the rest of the states, as Utah is not the only one. And so an anthropologist has no choice but to conclude that the church's claim to have the Book of Mormon as their keystone is not the case. If this was a culture that had died off and had to be archaeologically discovered, and then anthropologists come in, they would associate it with the inverted pentagram instead. And thus the utilization of the Book of Mormon was for the sole purpose of emulating the bad examples from it. As they would read or listen to talks of the prophets that completely violate the Book of Mormon, as they would watch social media posts by Mormons and ex-Mormons. The conclusion, as an outsider looking in, is that the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints is OCCULT, and that their God is Lucifer. All this confirming the temple with the temple rituals inside of it. As an anthropologist would look to the various stages of change in the Brighamite temple text of the endowment ceremony, as they used to have the death penalties for revealing the secrets, just as Helaman chapter 6 says that the devil's great and abominable church does, as they united with the secret band of Gadianton. And so the denialism of the church, and by apologists to redefine, is seen as a fraud. So anthropology is an essential science to correctly identify various cultures, whether in the past or in the present.